So it's time now to start building the main towers, and we're going to spend the time in this video just looking at how we can use the plan and the elevation to generate that geometry. Now, this is a good point in time to stop and to think about how you want to model this, because there are a few different methods and certain people prefer to do things differently. So one option is that you could start with the elevation and you could draw this entire outline and model and extrude that sideways using this curve. But we do need to remember, if we turn on the plan and we turn off what we've modeled so far, that the building will also taper towards the top. So it is a very three-dimensional object, so that makes it quite tricky to model just extruding from an elevation, because you would have to then taper the top and make sure that everything is correct. But there are many ways to skin this chicken. So the method I'm going to use is one of the simplest, and it's a little bit of a method used mainly in very conceptual modeling. What we're going to do in this video is to extrude up a pure vertical form where all of the slab heights are in the correct position, and then we are going to use a modifier just to stretch and curve the entire form sideways so that it fits with what our elevation and plan show us. The reason why I want to do that is I want to keep a flexibility in my model where I have in my history on the side here the original pure form from which that building is derived, just in case the client comes to us and says, oh look, we've run out of budget, we now need to make the building perfectly vertical and we want you to remodel the whole thing, and then you have to go back and restart the whole process. So instead, if you have that pure geometry, you always have something to fall back on in case the client takes a step back in his decisions. So that is something that I think has a lot of power to it, so we will use that method as we build this. So to get started, let's go into our plan, and we're going to start by building a box. And using the snap tool, we will first of all create a layer before we start that process. We're going to call this layer 03, since we're now going higher up in the building, and we're going to call this tower facade. It would help if I spelt it correctly, and we're going to start modeling on that. So the box, we use the snap tool, and we can just extrude it to a random height, since we're going to adjust that later. And we can immediately convert this to an editable poly and select these edges on the right, or at least the vertices. Now in our front view, we can first pull this up to the height that it's meant to be at. Right now we're doing things very roughly. We're going to adjust them slightly better in the next step. So I've got this going, and I just want to cover the main building. So what I want to do now is I want to have a look at the actual heights that things should be at. For example, the top of this level here should be around 176.75. So when I select those vertices there, I uncheck that, and I want to type in 176.75. Then that's going to drop down to that height, and I know that the height here is 22.5. So I'm going to do the same thing here, 22.5. Next, I'm going to set out the main heights. I'm just going to select that there. So I'm going to create connect, press W to make sure you're in the move command. And then I'm going to set the top floor, because the distance between all of these floors is exactly the same, and it's just this one up here and the difference between the podium and the first floor that is slightly odd. So I'm going to just set up those two lines, and then we're going to connect with a continuous set of equally spaced lines once we're done with that. So here I can see the 170. So in the Z axis, I'm going to manually select 170. I'm going to repeat that same process and now do 30.5. Hope you can see that. That's 30.5 there. So that is the height that we're going to put this line to. And now for the easy part, we basically need to connect with enough segments to fill up the difference. Now we could count the floors, or we could just do it visually like so until we can see that each of these segments perfectly lines up with each floor level. And that's what we want. That's going to be our base geometry. So now what we have is, in elevation at least, we have the tower that covers the full outer volume. And this is how the developer or the architect or the client could have designed the building from the beginning. They could have just done one big block, but they've decided to shape it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to leave this editable poly as is, and we're going to add modifiers on top of it. So the one I'm going to use is this one, the 3x3x3 box. And I'm going to test out if this gives me enough control using just these 3x3s. If I need more, I can delete it and try again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in these lines here. And I'm going to just start pushing this envelope to try and get the closest possible envelope to match. And yes, this isn't scientifically correct, but what we're going for is to get the main volume looking correct for a conceptual style model. So once we have the elevation right, we just have a look, that's what we've done. Basically shaped the entire thing. We can go into the top view, and we can do the same thing here where we need to taper the building inwards. Now it would help actually to have an elevation from this side, from the left, so that we could actually see how to do that. So since we don't, what we can do is just use a plain taper in 3D Max. So we can just write TA for taper, press enter. And in 3D we can start to edit that, but you'll see that it's tapering in all directions. So you want to make sure that you choose the right axis. And this obviously has some playing around, and see that that's basically the effect that we want to have. So we look in plan view and we will see how much taper we need to get that desired effect. And again, we don't have to be 100% accurate since it is conceptual, but we want to be more or less there. We can see here that the base of the building is slightly narrower than we need it to be. So you can go and play around with the taper settings until you get the exact model to be exactly how you want it to. Let's say that we're just going to kind of trick things here by very manually and crudely stretching it vertically. We can always go back and add an edit poly and then just really tweak the exact vertices to be in the right spot. So let's do that just for accuracy's sake. So now I'm pressing W, and just manually I'm going to slide this until it hits visually that point. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Now instead of using that taper command, we could have also just used our 3x3 box, which may have been what I did in the original model. Since the taper was the reason for the bottom displacing slightly, so we can also look at limiting the effect by sliding that slightly higher. There's several things that you can do to just configure that correctly, so you can see how you want to do that. Right, so the last thing I want to show you, we can actually do, just before we finish off, we can do this box here, which is a simple one. And I'm going to use exactly the same process as the last time, using my snap command, snap onto there, lift it up, and in perspective, do that. Now the front view, convert to editable poly. I'm going to pull this building up. And we know that the bottom is 22.5, so we just do the same thing, 22.5. And then here I don't have the heights written down, so we can either calculate them, we can go back into CAD, we can calculate with a calculator. I'm just going to do it visually so that I don't take up too much of anybody's time. And I'm going to leave it at that. Since this building is slightly less important, what's important about this building is that framework structure that we're going to build around it. And there we go. Now we have the base geometry that we can use. This one as well we can connect. And we can just connect it once, drop this one to 30.5, and connect this guy up enough times to have the slab levels aligning. Great, so there we've created the outer volumes of our box. And in the next video, we are going to look at how to set up a mirror point so that we can mirror everything we create on one side to the other side, since this building is identical to this one here. And we're also going to look at how we can start adding a little bit more detail to this facade and then getting some of these slabs in place which jut out as balconies. So in this video, just to recap very quickly, we have looked at how we can make the principal main form for the main facade that we will then generate all of the other elements on the building from. And that's it for this one.